Welcome back to another installment of Game Manual Zero. Today we will be discussing 5 main topics. Those topics are rigging, arms, intake, and your team's software. Let's go right into the video.
The first topic that we will be talking about is rigging. Rigging refers to the way that string, belt, or chain is set up to extend and retract a linear extension. This is an important and time-consuming requirement for any team that uses linear extensions, so be sure to spend adequate time on it. There are two main types of rigging, continuous rigging and cascade rigging. Continuous rigging entails rigging one long extension string from a motor-powered spool to the top of the base stage, then to the bottom of the first stage, then to the top of the first stage, and so on and so forth. A retraction string, coming from a second spool on the same axis as the first spool, is then anchored to the top stage. When the motor rotates one direction, the extension spool reels in the extension string, so it becomes shorter. In doing so, the system extends. Cascade rigging is a bit more complicated than continuous rigging. Much like continuous rigging, an extension string originating from a spool is rigged to the top of the base, running down to the bottom of the first stage. However, instead of being rigged to the top of the stage, the extension string is anchored to the bottom of the first stage. A second extension string anchored to the top of the base is rigged to the top of the first stage and anchored at the bottom of the second stage. The pattern continues until all stages have been rigged. Note that unlike continuous rigging, every stage moves at the same time when doing cascade rigging. Now let's talk about arms. Arms are another way to achieve extension past the 18-inch by 18-inch dimension of the robot. Unlike linear extensions, arms require lots of torque. A standard 40-to-1 or even 60-to-1 gearbox will not be suitable in most applications. Rarely should an arm be directly mounted to the driving motor. Instead, torque should be transferred via gear, chain, or belt. Large arms can also be very hard to control. Depending on the application and implementation, arms can be either faster or slower than the other linear extension options. We suggest your team have a discussion on this topic, and depending on resources and such, decide whether to use an arm or linear extension. Now let's talk about intakes.
An intake is a system that is used to pick up game objects in an FTC match. There are two types of intakes, passive intake and active intake. Passive intakes are mechanisms in which the driver must pick up individual elements, usually by actuating some sort of gripper, which holds the game element. Claws are the most common sort of passive intake, and probably one of the first mechanisms that jump to mind while brainstorming. Unlike most intakes, claws can be made with only servos, and thus don't require valuable motor slots. An active intake is when a robot comes in contact with a game element and gets possession of it as soon as it's touched. In this year's game, one common example of this is the compliant wheel roller intake. In this design, when the ring touches the compliant wheels, it is shot right into the robot, and the robot has possession of it and uses it to score points. Every single FTC game is going to require an intake, and this is why intakes are so important. Now, let's move on to the software. Your FTC robot is going to be coded either through block programming, Java, or Python. As a beginner, it is important that you become familiar with important control structures such as if-else statements, for loops, while loops, and for each loops. These control structures are by far the most commonly encountered, and thus, learning and becoming familiar with them is extremely important. All code in an FTC game is stored in op modes. An op mode stands for operational mode, and it runs the code in an FTC match. We suggest you look at Game Manual 0 to find information on methods that are commonly used in an op mode.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and share this video. And if it's your first time on our channel, make sure to subscribe and check out our previous videos. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, shoot us a DM on Instagram, or send us an email. That's all. Make sure to stay tuned in for our upcoming videos. See ya!